so focused on tonight, and it's been a long time for me. And the last time I was on the field, it wasn't pretty. It was against Detroit in the playoffs and against Baltimore, and I was horrific. I've had 2 hip surgeries. I've had 2 knee surgeries. I'm fighting for my life. I have to defend myself. If I don't defend myself, no one else will. I'm not saying that anyone is making anything up. I'm not saying anything about MLB or anything that's going on. I am saying that we have a process. This is America. You have an opportunity to defend yourself, and I think the process, like all of us Americans, will have an opportunity to defend ourselves in a due process, and I think that's what we have today, and I'll have my day.
All right, folks, I'm sorry I stepped on A-Rod, but I was so excited to get to my next guest. It's been a long time since I had the pleasure of welcoming in George Vecsey, sports columnist for the New York Times, author of 6 national best-selling books, including Stan Musial and American Life and so many others. George, how are you, sir?
I am well. We go back a ways to Arthur George Rust and all the above.
The late Arthur George Rust Jr., yeah, and the Big Ball Orchard in the South Bronx, and George Vecsey was a frequent guest during my sports days back at WABC, but it's a pleasure to talk to you. Great piece today in the New York Times on A-Rod, and George, I know you're not making excuses. You're actually basically saying relating what A-Rod has said over the years about the fact that his father left him and the family when A-Rod was 9, and he's really never gotten over that.
I think that's true. I just want to make it clear, and I think I did in my column, that A-Rod doesn't start every conversation. I mean, you just played a long monologue by him. He sounds like he should be living in the Moscow airport. He's way out there. He doesn't say, he doesn't start off every conversation by saying the trouble is.
No.
Kindly, Officer Krupke, you got to understand. He talks about his father at times, or
right.
Has in the past.
No, I just wanted to point out that you weren't saying
right.
that's the reason he's in the trouble he's in. Yeah.
Right. Neither of us are.
Right.
But since I've been around him, my daughter covered him when she was a columnist in Seattle. I know a little bit about him. I was just trying to give readers another sense of it. Not that it's anything new. He's talked about it before.
Right.
But his father did leave him, and my conclusion is that it has left him without some kind of voice that says, Alex, don't do that. That's stupid. You better cut it out, blah, blah, blah. Of course, as people have pointed out on the New York Times website and other places, there are people who grow up without a parent or two, including the President of the United States, who is one of the more centered people I know, and, lost 2 father figures early in his life. So people do go on.
Right, they do go on. We'll leave the President of the United States out of this conversation right now. But one of the people you talk about who does have that influence and does have that, that fatherly figure and the parental guidance to this day probably is Derek Jeter.
Well, absolutely. It's a contrast, and you almost hate to make the contrast between somebody who did and does have an active father and one who doesn't. Derek happens to come from a terrific family. Father who's a drug counselor and active guy, mother who's an accountant, and a sister. And I point out in the column that Jeter gives every impression that all 3 of his people in his family have let him know at times, Derek, don't be a jerk. I mean, those are my words, but the point being that he knows when people would be unhappy with him, would be disillusioned with him, and as far as I can see, he has never really crossed that line into jerkdom. And Alex doesn't have that trip switch.
No, and again, here's a man who signed a $250 million contract, who is on the, just about ready possibly to lose $31 million or so of that money, and who knows what legal action the Yankees might try to take after that, whether they'd be successful or not, we don't know. But first of all, let me ask you about the treatment and what he said yesterday. Yesterday he had an opportunity again. He was asked point blank at least twice at that press conference before the game in Chicago, have you used PEDs? If not, why don't you just say you haven't, right now? And he wouldn't do it.
Yeah, as he said, he can't talk about the specifics, lawyers, orders, and all of that. He probably can't say it one way or the other legally, but I noticed that Michael Weiner, who is one of the great straight shooters, just a terrific guy.
He head of the Players Association, right?
Players Association, that Weiner had a comment about that these are legalities, collective bargaining. He's not saying that Alex didn't do it either. So if nobody's saying he didn't do it, I think we have to take the cues from what we're not hearing. If it were a total mistake, I mean, I've heard enough of Lance Armstrong and other people saying, "Gee, I never did a thing. It wasn't me. It was the other guy." Blah blah blah. That even if Alex did say, "I never took anything," I believe that Major League Baseball has a whole trunkload of stuff from biogenesis and Dr. Galea and going back to his own admission that he took it. He's a recidivist.
Absolutely. George, we only have a couple of minutes, so let me ask you to get some predictions here. Do you think that that suspension by an arbitrator will be watered down, at least maybe cut in half or in some way altered?
I think it's possible. I think it's possible that a good lawyer and an arbiter, in the best sense of the word, who is neutral, would say this seems excessive to me. And for all I know, baseball has said let's throw the book at him and see how far we go. I mean, I'm not saying that I know anything that they did, but it's conceivable they say this is what we want to do. But what is their actual calculation of games based upon? The arbiter could say that and say, sounds a little harsh to me, let's cut the difference and go on from there.
Right.
That's just me talking.
No, absolutely. I mean, you have Braun, who did test positive, got off on a technicality and got only 60 games. So I see that. Dallas Green told me yesterday that baseball will never forgive Alex, and baseball history will never forgive Alex. He'll never get in the Hall of Fame. You agree with all that?
I think it's true. I think that Rodriguez is so unpleasant a persona in the way he operates in all of his history that he's already admitted if he winds up being suspended for any part of it, the arbiter upholds any part of it, he's got a serious mark against him and everything he's ever done. I mean, we saw what a wonderful, but it's like Bonds and Clemens. Both of those were Hall of Fame players almost immediately upon coming into the major leagues. It's going to take a long time for people to forget what they did.
Absolutely.
And they've never been suspended for anything.
Yeah. George, really a pleasure. I hope you let us call on you again, sir. Thank you.
Anytime, you know where to reach me.
Okay.
We go back. Always nice to hear from you.
Thank you. George